Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Simon from Scar Illustration, and I hope you're keeping well. Today, I'm going to talk about creating art to send to a specific company that you'd like to work with. And in this case, I'll be creating an illustration that I'll be sending to Wizards of the Coast. This is the second one of these videos that I've created, and if you'd like to check out the first video, I'll leave a link in the description below. Let's dive in. As with the first of these sample illustrations, I referenced a Muddy Colors blog post by Wiley Beckert entitled Creating a Targeted Illustration for Sample for My Painting Roadmap. The post was very helpful, and I would definitely recommend reading it if you get the chance. The next thing was to come up with an idea for the sample commission. As I haven't worked with Wizards of the Coast, I found a number of sample card assignments that I could work from online. And for this painting, I decided to go with something a little bit more challenging than my first attempt. Here's the sample assignment I went with. Color, black and white. Setting, small but athletic woman dressed in black and white with a large circle cut out of the top front of her attire. Small triangles are also cut out of the attire, forming what looks like a sun pattern. She is kneeling in a battlefield strewn with corpses of soldiers in black armor. The souls are starting to rise from the corpses and gather behind the woman. She is staring ahead, looking determined. Focus, the woman with the spirits rising and gathering around her. Mood, determination, and vengeance. As you'll see, I did deviate a little bit from the sample assignment, but the main points are all still there. Next, I created some rough thumbnails and then distilled those down to the strongest ideas. After that, I created some rough color sketches to get a basic idea of the illustration. I grabbed a sample card online and placed each of the color roughs into the space allotted for the illustration to check which one was going to work the best, paying close attention to the design, silhouettes, and how the illustration would look on a card at a much smaller size. Once that was all done, I then gathered reference materials and, as always, took my own reference photos for the character whilst keeping in mind the general idea for the lighting. As this painting was pretty complex, I spent quite a bit longer compiling the reference that I needed. As well as that, I made sure that the reference all fit together and still had the vision of the color sketch. It's always worth taking the time to do this at the beginning of any painting, because the last thing that I want to do is to keep stopping the painting process to go and search for more reference. Once I had gathered all the info I needed, I then created a final sketch which I would use as a semi-rough guide to the finished illustration. In the beginning phases, I like to stay fairly close to this sketch, but as the painting progresses, I'm always changing things so as to get the best result. In this case, I went back and forth on a number of elements such as the main character, the spirits, and the placement of other elements. After the sketch was done, it was time to start blocking in all the elements with their respective local colors. The idea is to get as much of the basic color information down as possible before moving on to the next stage. For this type of thing, I'll tend to use a harder brush as I'm just looking for coverage and I'm not yet concerned with the rendering. Back in the day, I would start rendering things out immediately in my rush to feel better about the painting. But as soon as I moved to other parts of the painting, it became painfully obvious that things weren't going to match up. In the end, I just have to bite the bullet and repaint areas. Not exactly an ideal workflow. These days, I leave the final rendering to almost the very end. In fact, my illustrations tend to look fairly ugly for most of the process, and it's only in the latter stages that they look like they're coming together. This isn't always an easy thing to work through mentally, especially if I'm unfamiliar with the subject matter, but I found that it gives me the best results. Once the block-in was done, I went ahead and started working on the main character. In the past, I would tend to work on the easier parts of the painting first, thinking that once they were done, I'd then have more time to complete the more complex areas. But I've found that working on the hard parts first actually takes a lot of the pressure off, and I can then relax a bit when going to the less difficult aspects of the piece. Most of the main character was fairly straightforward. The most challenging parts turned out to be her face, no surprise, and her hair, which was a bit of a surprise. I ended up having to look for more reference for this, as I just couldn't seem to get a believable silhouette or a shape for the hair that I liked. I also decided to embellish her outfit a bit by adding a sun symbol to her knee guard. After the main character was about halfway done, I started bouncing around the painting somewhat. For the background area, I wanted this to be simply rendered and not too fussy, but at the same time, still convey enough visual info for the viewer to get the narrative. For the midground area, I started to move past the sketch and the reference to find something better for the painting as a whole. I'm continuously flipping the painting so my eyes don't get too used to how things look, and then invariably miss some glaring mistake. I'm also trying to keep in mind the different textures and changing either my brush, the way I'm painting, or both so as to get something as believable as possible. Next, it was time to start developing the foreground area, which is the second most important element. This part of the painting had a lot of details to get right. I also had to remember to not go overboard with the rendering, as I didn't want this area to compete with the main character for the viewer's attention. I ended up adding about a medium amount of details, but without the refinement or the brushwork of the main character. I also darkened the foreground and toned down the contrast somewhat. After that, it was time to tackle the finishing touches to the main character. Up until this point, I'd kinda ignored the shade on the top portion of the figure that I'd suggested in my color sketch, as I wanted to get all the fundamentals right first. But it was something that I definitely wanted to include on the final painting, as well as the glowing eye. After that, I turned my attention to the spirits. The spirits turned out to be fairly challenging. I left them pretty vague on my sketch, but when it came time to actually paint them, I decided that I wanted them to have a different look. Not only that, but I wasn't super happy with the proportions and the gestures, so I spent a bit of time developing those. Once they were halfway done, I realized that they looked way too old and still a bit too vague. So I went ahead and fixed up their faces, added some more details to the robes, plus some glowing eyes to match the main character, and generally refined the overall look of them. Next, it was time to finalize the fire elements. Painting fire is always a bit tricky, and this is where having good reference is essential in my opinion. For this, I like to use a chalk brush as well as a soft brush to get a more believable look to the fire, as opposed to just trying to render it all with the airbrush. Finally, I added some refinements such as brushstrokes and reflected lights that I like my paintings to have. With this sample illustration, I wanted to really flesh out the card description as much as possible, but still have it work at a smaller size. As always, I've added textural brushstrokes and effects for a more traditional feel, so as to put my stamp on it. I'll be sending in this second sample illustration for a review, and while I'm waiting to hear back, it's time to get started on the next sample. Hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Please consider liking this video and subscribe to my channel. Have a good one, and keep on painting.